Hello, everybody. I'm David Politzer, Director of the School of Art at the University of Houston. Um, Happy little Friday to everybody. I want to welcome everyone to the final event in our fall speaker series, a lecture and conversation with artist Derrick Adams. We've had such an incredible group of visitors, and it's been such a rich season of talks with writer-critic Aruna D'Souza, design activist Dean Nichols, and last week, artist Nicholas Galinan. The School of Art will continue the speaker series this spring with a new round of guests, so be on the lookout for email announcements and social media posts. If you don't already follow the School of Art on social media, we are at School Art on Instagram and Twitter. No TikTok yet, but stay tuned. I want to remind everyone that early voting has begun in Texas and it continues through October 30th. You can also vote on election day, obviously, November 3rd, but there could be long lines. So I do suggest the suggestion is that you vote early. There's even a polling place on campus at the Student Center South, room 220. So I believe we'll post a document in the chat that gives you some hints and tips on voting safely. So just a couple notes about how tonight is going to run before I turn it over. First, we're recording the talk and it will be available soon on our YouTube channel. That YouTube channel is quickly becoming a rich archive of our past lectures. In addition to this series, it also features the concurrent series, Interrogating Global Contemporary Art, which is being organized by a School of Art art historians. And you probably have noticed that this is a webinar and not a regular Zoom meeting. So you don't have all the same buttons and privileges that you typically do. You do have the chat and you do have the Q&A box. And we encourage you to use both of those enthusiastically during the talk. And if you want to get started with that, give it a whirl. If you could type into the chat, tell us where you're beaming in from and your name, and that way we can get an idea of our audience. For the Q&A, if you'd like to ask a question live, use the raise hand button and we'll invite you to unmute your mic so you can speak your question. You can also use the Q&A box to type your question. We'll monitor that and we're happy to speak your question for you. The only complication with all this is that if you're running an older version of Zoom, you may not be able to raise your hand or join with your voice. But if that's the case, like I said, just type your question in the Q&A box and we'll read it for you. And I'll remind you about all this stuff when we start the Q&A. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, the Hugh Roy and Lily France Cullen Distinguished Professor of Painting, Michael Ray Charles.
Thank you, David. And thank everybody for coming or attending. Derrick, the chat room is filled, brothers. There's a lot of folks interested in hear you speak about your work, as am I. I just wanted to say that, just to remind you guys, again, that the chat room is available to add questions, of course, as Derrick speaks, and we will have time at the end of the lecture for Q&A. So I'll just go right into the reading of the introduction and then turn it over to our speaker. Derrick Adams was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1970. He received his MFA from Columbia University and a BFA from the Pratt Institute. He is an alumnus of the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture and the Marie Walsh Sharp Foundation Studio Program. Derrick is a recipient of the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation Residency in 2019, the Gordon Parks Foundation Fellowship in 2018, a Studio Museum Joyce Alexander Wynn Artist Prize in 2016, and a Louis Comfort Tiffany Award in 2019. He has been the subject of numerous solo exhibitions. Congratulations on that, Derrick. Been hard at work, brother. Including Buoyant in 2020 at the Hudson River Museum, Where I'm From in 2019 at the Gallery in Baltimore City Hall, Sanctuary in 2018 at the Museum of Art and Design, New York, Transmission 2018 at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Denver, Network 2017 at California African American Museum, Los Angeles, and the Channel 2012 at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. Derrick's work has been presented in important public exhibitions, including Men in Charge, Power, Triumph, and Truth, 2019, a 10-city exhibition presented by the Smithsonian Institution, PERFORMA, 2015, 2013, and 2005. The Shadows Took Shape in 2014, Radical Presence in 2013 and 14 at the Studio Museum in Harlem, Greater New York, 2005, the MoMA PS1, an open house working in Brooklyn in 2004 at the Brooklyn Museum. His work resides in permanent collections in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Studio Museum in Harlem, Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, Birmingham Museum of Art, and the Whitney Museum of Art. Please help me to welcome Derrick for this presentation.
Thank you, Michael. I'm honored to have you introduce me. I'm familiar with your work. I follow your work, in many iterations of my career as an artist, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm excited to be in conversation with you after the presentation.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you, and thank you, David. Okay. First, I'd like to start with a quote that I refer to in my daily practice, studio practice. And it's a quote by an author who I respect highly, and I definitely use as a form of foundational influence when I think about my practice as an artist. It's writer and critic Bell Hooks. And the quote, "The function of art is to do more than tell it like it is. It is to imagine what is possible." And for me, that is a really driving force for my work with all of the pressing things that I experience and we experience in our society. It's really important to also use your ability to imagine a world beyond the restraints of what we experience on a daily basis. So for me, it's such a very important part of my practice is to use what I know and what I feel that also that we should also see in the world, as I am an artist and I can create many things that can refer to possibilities as well as to shed mirror reflection on what is existing or happening in the world. So thank you, Bell Hooks. I love you and I appreciate your words. Moving on, I like to use a lot of references. References are really the motivation for a lot of my work. A lot of research goes into the things that I make. They are really embedded in the fabric of my ideas. They are not always so apparent in the way that I'm thinking, the way I present the ideas. My references are not always very apparent one-to-one, but I like to take an opportunity today to elaborate more on some of the substance that is somehow the ingredients of the motivation and the outcome of my work. And here I'm going to start with an image of Martin Luther King at March on Washington, and just to show a lot of the unrest that is constantly surrounding us as Americans, as Black Americans, things that we have to experience, we have experienced, we've been able to move through, sometimes with difficulty, most times with difficulty, but there's also another side of the experience, Black American experience, that kind of relates more to the humanist aspect of who we are. And that's what I was really looking for when I started this particular series of work, when I discovered this image of Dr. King here in Jamaica. It was an article that was a profile on he and his wife and their vacation in Jamaica at a resort. Looking at this image really is a driving force for my floater series. After looking at references, historical references, I came across this image that was a full-on spread in an interview with Dr. King, just talking about his experience of being, on vacation and kind of being in the space of repose and really reflecting on the political climate that surrounds him, that was, affecting the world, not just America. What was really important about this image is that people sometimes don't understand the complexity of leisure as it appeals or as it relates to the Black body. Leisure for the Black figure or the Black body is a political act. It is an act that in most cases is not necessarily understood as a political act, because it kind of is nestled in this idea of leisure as a more dismissive part of human nature or humankind. But in all actuality, the idea of leisure or play really highlights the complexity of the human experience and the individual itself. So that became kind of like the beginning of the series, the Floater series. So this is an image of the installation at Hudson River Museum, which was the first presentation, solo presentation of this work in a museum context. I started in 2015, and after kind of thinking about the black body and repose, I was really interested in contemporary ideas relating to how to present the body as it related to me as a person, in a very one-to-one experience. A lot of my work is really about me discovering, and also myself, me allowing the viewer to understand the point of view that I'm coming from a perspective of first person. So this particular body of work kind of came out of the idea of really looking inward and looking in my surroundings and seeing people like me participating in this thing we call joy and this thing that we call relaxation, and how the individuals around me also were participating in other very serious actions of social justice and social engagement beyond what was present at that moment. But I started to understand the complexity of seeing these figures in this space that I share with them, but also understanding what they deal with on a daily basis. So I felt the idea of leisure became such a radical act, and I began to really think about how to capture this and present this narrative through a collection of collage and painting works. So I'm just gonna flip through some of these images. These are the most recent images and actually kind of the roundup of the series. And I actually made these works this year at the beginning of quarantine. I began, working in my studio in February, and I just started to kind of look at some of the images, some of friends, some of family members that I had taken or have been sent to me by other family members and friends, depicting imagery of family members and friends having leisurely moments in the pools and at beaches. And that became part of the ending of the series, which was very meditative at the time, because it was a time where we were dealing with such isolation, but I was able to use my space and use my imagination at a time that was really bleak to try to envision the possibilities that exist before and hopefully after. This is another image from a close friend and family members in their pool. This image right here is an image that was completely derived from imagination. I was really interested in the ideas of this communion of Black individuals in this pool, very different and very uniquely represented here in this particular image. I also wanted to create an image that I felt was the most iconic in the origin of what I was trying to communicate with even the beginning of the series. And this piece I really love a lot because this object in the middle is a Black unicorn float that I actually was able to create as a real object that exists in the world. This is another image from the series. What was so exciting about making work during the pandemic is I was able to really think about how to end the series and what I wanted to create for this series. So I was able to really paint images of close friends and family. And so I had a totally different relationship with this work. Although I painted images from this series of friends and family, this particular body work was solely related to my personal relationship with the subject. So it was a very joyous, but also very reflective experience. This is one of my favorite images from the series. These family members. And now I'm going to go to images that inspired another series, an installation based on the Negro Motorist Guide. I happened to come across this also a few years ago, and I became really intrigued at the possibilities of what existed at a time where, again, the black body was met with challenges, navigating through America, figuring out how to participate in this thing that we call leisure, this thing that everyone else was welcome to participate in who were not Black, but Black Americans were kind of subject to dealing with the oppressive structure that existed around us. And so what I thought was really fascinating about the Green Book is that a postal worker, Victor Hugo Green, and his wife, Alma Green, decided to create this publication that helped Black Americans navigate through the country and also to connect with other Black businesses and other non-Black businesses that welcome Black travelers. I juxtaposed this particular cover of the Green Book with a photograph of my family. This image on the right is an image of my aunts and uncles at a very young age, traveling from Baltimore to Virginia, where my family's from. When I saw this image, maybe a couple of years ago, I was so excited that this image kind of represented this optimism of America and this youthfulness of these individuals living in 1967, where there was a lot more issues dealing with racism and, and navigating through the country, that they found a way to persevere, a way to connect with each other, a way that to present this idea of perseverance in a way that we never really think about when we think about the past and we think about the history that we're presented about figures who lived at a particular time. This is around the same time as a photographic interview with Martin Luther King that was for Jet magazine. This is around the same year. And this became the motivation for my show at Museum of Art and Design called Sanctuary. My interest in the Green Book was not necessarily dealing with the trauma attached to navigating through America. It was really more about the excitement to be invited to the Museum of Art and Design and to incorporate one of the most successful forms of design publication that I felt existed in America made by a postal worker and his wife. A New York resident decided on his own time to compile this data to help people navigate safely from one place to another. And for me, that became like such an exciting endeavor to communicate the success of that through a piece. It was not really about the trauma of the experience, what happened to people on their travel that was detrimental to life or death. It was really more about the idea when people were able to connect and how that felt to be able to connect through this service that was given to the community by Mr. and Mrs. Green. And so this particular installation, Sanctuary, right here is an image. It's called Keep Your Head Down and Your Eyes Open. And these little objects that are on this sculptural thing that looks like a road are hats that were called flat caps, and then also later driver's caps. But it was a hat that was used and worn by a lot of Black Americans when they travel as a way of camouflaging yourself to look like a chauffeur versus a person who owned a nice car or a person who had belongings. A lot of Black men would wear these hats and have their families sit in the back seat to appear as if they were chauffeuring someone around. And that was a tactic that was used to get to the next destination. This for the exhibition, I also took advantage of blowing up some of the pages from the Green Book to give people some more geographical information to where these listings were, and some of the places, if not all, mostly all of the places listed in the Green Book are no longer in existence. But what Mr. and Mr. Green, what Mrs. and Mr. Green did, they also created an archive, an historical archive that really mapped what did exist in these places as a reference to the economic structure of these cities at a time where they weren't being, archived. So for me, it's really an interesting place to talk about the idea of Black people at a time where people had very little information about what was happening with services, where we were going, places we went for entertainment. I mean, most of the places we know are places that are presented now in movies and things like that, but there were quite a few places that Black people frequent. And in the Green Book, it was a publication that was updated frequently, and it was represented in barbershops and other smaller businesses, and people used it as almost like a Bible to get to where they wanted to go. There's another sculpture in the Green Book exhibit, the Sanctuary exhibition. It's called Beacon. These are some sculptural objects that represented this idea of services rendered in the Green Book, and a lot of the pieces were really reflecting on this idea of respect to the consumer, respect to the customer, as because it was really not only about buying things, but it was also about the idea of being appreciated. And so these particular objects on the wall represent this kind of almost like a strip mall of some sort. These are collage works on plywood, fabric, and other three-dimensional objects. Graphite paint. This particular piece is called Join Our Circle, and the circular objects that are in this particular collage work are the brims of hats. This particular work was more commenting on the social groups, the social activities, the cabarets, the activities that existed in most spaces listed in the Green Book. There's also another aspect of the exhibition. Okay, then going to this next body of work, I was invited by D'Asta Gates, a really good friend in Chicago, to make a body of work or present an idea, installation in Stony Island Arts Bank, a historical bank that was closed for some time in Chicago that had reopened and became a space for engagement, social engagement, exhibitions, performances. And so I thought it would be beneficial for me to really dig into the archive that was there, the Johnson archive, the publishing archive. That's the major component of the art bank. And in the archive, I was really interested in the history of inventors, people who created objects, commercial objects, objects that helped to push forward this idea of being streamlined, being futuristic, all these things that for me, growing up in the 70s was a major part of the conversation, starting from even sci-fi movies. So when I discovered that Charles Harrison, a Chicagoan, created or redesigned the Viewmaster that we know in pop culture, I was really blown away. I mean, in the archive, there was such information about his contribution as a designer, and I became really interested in that and thinking about how to really dig into the archive and pull out images and information about Black American inventors and product designers that existed at a particular time. A lot of my work is all kind of coming out of the 70s and the 60s era and kind of talking about how that kind of have influenced the way that I think about myself and the way I think about the culture that I exist in. And so I'm really interested in and focus a lot as the foundation of my practice on a time where Black people started to really understand their purpose and their commitment to American culture. And they were very active members in all aspects of American culture in the way that we develop, the way it's been developed in a way that everyone participates in the benefits of these things, but not really knowing who created what. So this particular piece I created for Stony Island Arts Bank was called Future People. And so this installation was comprised of images that I collected from the archive relating to innovation, Black American innovation in technology and product design, and also a video image, a video piece that used the audio from Frankie Knuckles, which was also part of the archive at Stony Island Arts Bank. There's a room of Frankie Knuckles records and some of his equipment housed at the bank. And I was fortunate to be able to use some of the music and incorporate it in the soundtrack of this moving image. And what I thought was really interesting about the space and its history is that it kind of reminded me of a kind of a space shuttle. And I felt really excited about the idea of kind of combining, or at least thinking about 2001 Space Odyssey and how that is a big influence also in my ideas of how to present information, how to talk about the past, how to talk about the future, how to combine those two things together to create a certain level of synergy and a visceral experience for the viewer. So this is the middle of the space that kind of housed a space for social engagement. So people were welcome to come in to watch the video. I had, at the opening night, I had someone actually mix the records from the Frankie Knuckles archive, April Hunt, DJ April Hunt. She came and took the records that I used to make the soundtrack, and she played them live in the space. So these collages were elements taken from, copied from the archive and collaged and inserted in this motif that I used to show this idea of space and things kind of moving around. It's called like space junk. things that are moving around in space that have relevance in some way to someone. I kind of fuse these images, these collage images, with paper plates, because I thought, in my mind, as I was constructing the exhibition, it was really more about communion. And I try to bring it back to family gatherings and how the plate is such a subject of sharing and subject of connecting. And also the idea that it could be like a disc, you know, like a solar disc. These also have these cardboard window frames that I collage onto the works to mimic spaceship windows. This is a video. And now we're going to another source of inspiration for a series, ongoing series, Patrick Kelly, the late Patrick Kelly, who passed in 1990, was one of the first designers to exhibit their work in the Louvre. He also was one of the first Black designers to secure a contract with Vogue Pattern Company, also Butterick Company, and also really broke into stardom at a very young age. For me, thinking about Patrick as a source of inspiration was exciting because I knew very little about him. A lot of my work is really about the investigation of learning histories that for some reason I was not exposed to. It was not in school. It was not in the environment that I was familiar with, where this information was distributed. So my ongoing interest is learning these stories, learning these histories, and thinking about how to communicate these through visual language, which is the way that I work. So Patrick, I became really interested in Patrick color block structure of fashion. And I thought about how I could adopt that into a series of abstract collages, because when I thought about Patrick's work, I really appreciated the way that he was able to combine elements of color and shape in a way that was reminiscent of some forms that I related to African pattern, but also into Russian constructivism. So he became a subject for a body of work that I first presented at Studio Museum in Harlem in an exhibition called Patrick Kelly, The Journey, which came directly from my archive research at the Schomburg on Patrick Kelly, looking through his personal effects, other publications on him, and the name of the series and the name of the exhibition came directly from a letter that was written and was stored in the archive by Dr. Maya Angelou, where she was proposing to a publishing company that she would write a book on Patrick. And she said that the book would be called Patrick Kelly, The Journey. So I took that title as the title for this body of work and for the show. So now the exhibition is currently installed at SCAD Fash in Atlanta. And it's been up for quite some time due to the pandemic, and it was closed and now it's open. But this is a reinstall from the Studio Museum exhibition that was first installed at the County Cullen Public Library. This is a portrait of Patrick. This actually is called Patrick Kelly, The Journey. And these particular works are collage on paper using Patrick's clothing patterns, as well as other objects that were reminiscent of his style and the things that he was known for. He had a particular uniform that was denim overalls, white or red shirt, and a blue hat, a red, white, and blue hat that either said Paris or New York, mostly Paris, where he actually became the most popular when he left the country and went over to Paris to really focus on his work and focus on, I guess, gaining notoriety as a fashion designer. These collages are directly based on pattern structures, objects that he created. These works that I made are in line with my practice as an artist, because I'm really interested in hard edge abstraction, as well as hardline figurative painting. And this was an extension of kind of working outside of what I was familiar with in my practice of making figurative works, but I felt these works kind of occupied the same space, but a different approach. These are some of Patrick. This particular show was an interesting show because I was able to, well, the museum was able to acquire objects that Patrick made for various individuals who were close friends. And Patrick first lived in Atlanta before he came to New York and before he came to Paris. So a lot of Patrick's support was in Atlanta, and a lot of the supporters who are still alive offered these objects to put in juxtaposition of my collages and sculptural works that were installed in the museum. This is one of them. These are objects that were also donated from artifacts from individuals who worked with Patrick, who modeled for Patrick, who were Patrick's friends. This particular collage is based on a pattern of Patrick's. It was a dice pattern suit that I felt very drawn to as a image. And although this particular collage is a different configuration of the clothing pattern, I felt what I was really focused on with these works is trying to talk about movement. You know, a lot of these objects were seen on models. The way I saw them, they were documentations from models, either on video or photographic images. So I tried to capture that with the way that I made these very rigid and very exact color blocking of fabric and paint and clothing patterns on paper. I also took advantage of naming a lot of the collages based on terms that related to fashion. This particular one is called Runway. I imagine these particular collages are models moving down the runway. Then I was invited, and I was commissioned to create a permanent artwork on the facade of the fashion outlet of Chicago. And I was excited mainly because I thought about Patrick, and I thought about Patrick as a fashion designer and what would he necessarily, what he would think of this opportunity, and how it was very important for me to refer to Patrick through the making of this piece, and that this piece would be able to represent him in some ways as a monument to Patrick. And so the piece, you know, I was able to put a label, and a permanent label, and things talking more about the inspiration for this, some history on Patrick and the mall. I was also invited, commissioned to also create these light objects, these permanent light fixtures that also I felt was a companion to some of the geometric forms made by Patrick that were mostly embellishments and structural added structural elements to his dresses and other garments. And this piece is in Chicago. Is at the fashion outlet. You can, it's there permanently. Again, the function of art is to do more than tell it like it is to imagine what is the possibilities. Thank you.
That was pretty impressive, Derrick.
Thank you.
I think we're still on your screen. How are we going to do this, David? Do we go back to, okay.
Yeah, check it out.
Wow. Man, I got all these things. What's that?
That was a lot.
Yeah, but the way you presented it was tight. I enjoyed the presentation, and thank you for introducing me to Charles Harrison. I wasn't familiar with, I didn't know who he was, and I looked him up. Pretty amazing. I held some of those things that he designed or contributed to their design. And
I know, it's amazing. It's amazing to learn this later.
Yeah. I've spent some time thinking and looking at designers, some of my favorite early designers, Raymond Loewy, for example, and Henry Dreyfuss. Henry Dreyfuss as a communicator and trying to develop or at least explore whether or not there was a universal language, visual language. And I remember one time, the first time I went to Germany, I got off into this airport and no one was speaking English and I wasn't speaking German. And I just followed the signs, in a very interesting way. So contrary to some folks that would say there is no universal language, I think it's a visual language. I think it's an audio language as well, sound and image. Mm-hmm. But, we could talk about Harris at another point, but I want to try to present some questions to you. And I have a few myself and is there anything that you'd like to kind of talk more about in terms of your work before we start the Q&A and that you'd like to elaborate?
It's so much to talk about. So I'd like to have some feedback and maybe I can kind of respond directly to things.
Okay.
I mean,
Well, if we have a number of questions, and what I'm going to do, you talked about leisure, and I started jotting down some things: leisure, comfort, calm, ease, in your floating series, relaxation, rest, and peace. I think of leisure as synonymous with wealth and American culture. In particular to the times that we exist in, the concept of leisure and wealth is associated with the American dream. And it's interesting that as we speak, the debate is going on for the next president of the United States. And one of the things that's at stake is this concept of the American dream.
Yeah.
You spoke of Dr. King early on. I've never seen that image, by the way. That's a really wonderful image. All the images I've seen of Dr. King, I mean, he had his BDUs on, his camouflage, and he's marching, and the act of being what I've come to know as Dr. King. So it's interesting that you're creating this work that's about the dream in the midst of the uncertainty of the dream.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just think that most people who are dealing with oppressive structures would not necessarily be able to exist mentally and physically if they didn't have this moment of reflection that allowed them to kind of step away, even if it's for a moment. Just like when you see immigrants in big cities having a barbecue at, I go by, I might walk by a auto body shop and I might see a group of like young Latin guys having a barbecue in the midst of working on the car, and see their family and kids out and they're hanging out and they're playing music. And, that's important. Those things, when you have people who are dealing with these very stressful oppositions happening that jeopardizes their freedom, their family structure, the fact that we can have this moment as humans to have those experiences, have those obstacles that we have to deal with, but also find moments where, we have to break away. We have to step out of the cloud of smoke and understand what is really going on. And I feel leisure for me and the way I look at my family's history has always been a very interesting way of kind of looking at the bigger picture, stepping back and kind of having a different, a more healthy perspective of dealing with these types of structures, because these types of structures have existed for some time, but also we've also been able to work around a lot of things in the way that we are able to. And we've established certain parks, we've established certain places of leisure that's mentioned in the Green Book, and also some that still exist that we never look at as triumphant moments. We never look at those things as being achievements, because the way that we're positioned in society is that we don't even look at ourselves, regardless of our economic level, as people who deserve or have time to enjoy life, because of all of the other distractions that are around us and that are somehow working against this idea of this.
Mm-hmm.
But all the while, most of us do it. It doesn't have to be as a luxurious as like a stay at a luxury hotel, but it could just be sitting in the park with your family having lunch.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Baltimore, and my grandfather worked at the steel mill. And when he came home, everyone had to look like they were working. They had to pick up a broom or do something or pretend that they're doing something, because he was working all day. And I went to school, we were in school, but the fact that he was home all day, I'm sure he had to deal with other racists or other, obstacles at work, or, and there's things that I'm sure he dealt with as a Black man at that time. He would come home and we would have to look like we were doing stuff. But when we did have leisure, it was usually a trip down to Virginia to visit his family, or he would be the person who would enact this big barbecue or something. He even, believed in leisure. He did a lot of different things that allow extended families to come to my grandmother's house and hang out. And we went to every year. My grandmother would, for the whole neighborhood that they lived in, she would organize a trip to Hershey Park, Pennsylvania. She would get 3 or 4 buses. She invited everyone from the surrounding neighborhoods to come with us to this place, from various backgrounds, and we all went to Hershey Park for the day with our grandparents and parents. And so there was this thing that, for me now as an artist, as a grown-up, I'm looking back at and thinking about this as being such a very important part to reflect on, and as a creative practice, and to present these ideas is almost an idea of thinking about being radical without an idea of being radical. Like Victor Hugo Green, I don't think he thought he was an activist. I'm sure he probably thought he was just doing a service, but in turn he became like an activist, a social activist, without his intention probably being that.
Yeah, I gotta say before we continue, I appreciate what you do as an artist, and as a creative person, first and foremost. However you express yourself creatively, I really enjoy your work, and the presentation took me in a different place. I initially thought I would begin our discussion with an emphasis on the work itself, more formal kinds of ideas. But you started off talking about Dr. King, and that was a little surprising to me. But tying it into the Green Book mentioning that you're interested in researching and that being of importance to your practice. It threw me for a loop. So tearing up my script and here we go. I'm starting with words that I jotted down, but I think we all could use a bit more of an emphasis on leisure and just this calmness that I get through your painting. You take all of the noise out of it, but you put the noise in a different way. So
yeah,
my question to you is about dissonance, ideas and thoughts about dissonance in the work. There conflict, there's harmony and disharmony at play.
Mm-hmm.
But I've looked at a lot of work, and I think of music when I look at your work, right? Once I could get past the colors and the conflicting directional patterns and whatnot, I think of there's a structure in the work. So could you talk about dissonance?
When I'm kind of creating my work, I always think about, I have a lot of women in my family. I grew up with a lot of strong women in my family. And so color and decor and all those things became a major part of our daily action, our daily practice. Thinking about color, thinking about entertaining, like having people over, thinking about these complicated conversations happening at these social gatherings that, for me, I felt are always kind of merged together. I never felt that social activism and leisure were two separate things. When I walk into a barbershop, which is to get a haircut, you might walk out thinking about the war, or you might walk out thinking about, family structure, and so for me, it's never separated when I think about representing leisure and representing pain. I think that, to see the thing that affects oppressive structures more is to see someone who's being oppressed thrive and to move forward. The thing that made the one of the things that really made a lot of people angry in our culture that we exist in now is not that Obama was president, but the fact that he was a Black president, and he also had a very, very typical life structure that mirrored what is considered to be the American dream. But he's living an American dream. Who he is a representation of who we are as a people. And so I personally feel as a Black man, a lot of the things that are more jarring or more triggering is this level of success, or the idea of success, or the idea of leisure, or the idea of joy. Some people believe that what do we have to be happy about? What do we have to rejoice about? Not just people outside of our culture, but people who are also in our culture with so many things going on. And it is hard because we have to be calm, and we have to think. We have to give moments of reflection that are really just selfish for us to be able to deal with a lot of the stuff that's happening around us, So the lack of harmony is always going to be around us, because a lot of things, we can't really control a lot of things around us, but we can kind of center ourselves with who we are and the people who we love and respect, who we can kind of bring around us.
I love, I don't consider it old music. I just think it's good music. When you started presenting images of your family and then the floating, thinking about the pool, the images in the pool, a couple of things that came to mind, Joy and Pain.
That song, some of the songs.
Frankie,
I forgot the rapper. I forgot his name. Can't remember his name, but I know that song you're talking about.
Rob Bass.
Yeah, Rob Bass. Thank you, David. Yeah, Rob Bass.
Rob Bass.
Yeah, I think about that. You know, like that.
And then,
like, yeah.
And then just union. You know, it was a 70s, 60s thing when people were going to the parks and spending more time out. Those kinds of moments. I remember as a kid getting together with friends. And now in a pandemic, you have to be extra careful with regards to all of those kinds of things. Do you think about music when you work? I tell you what are you listening to when you work?
All the time. Music is a major part of my motivation.
Oh, yeah.
When I get up in the morning, I usually start with some jazz, like Kind of Blue with Miles on that on that vibe. And then as I get a little bit warmed up, I might play some R&B. I'm a big R&B person. I play that for a lot of, most of the day. And maybe some reggae, warming up, and then rap towards the end of the day. I might end up playing rap as kind of like the late afternoon turn up in the studio. But I usually deal with music in the way that I deal with like emotion. And so I usually start off really slow. Before I even get out of the bed, I put on the Bluetooth and put I say like my theme music for getting out of the bed. Like I don't get out of the bed without putting the Bluetooth on. And when I step out of the bed,
so you have your own theme music.
Yeah, like when I wake up in the morning, before I even get out of the bed, the music has to be on when I step on the floor, And so I think like Gregory Porter, who I like, and a lot of other, like it goes back and forth. But R&B is definitely, I would say, the favorite of the genre of music more than any other.
Yeah, I was stuck on yesterday, Enchantment. And what's that group that did Wildflower from the 70s? Kind of a one-hit wonder.
I know. I listened to that song actually. That
dude has a unique voice, man.
It's called. I know that group because my uncle, he would come into the house when I was a kid, and he was an artist. My uncle, he would come into the house, and when we're watching TV, he would come and scream that song in front of the TV. And my family would demand that he get out of the way of the TV,
Yeah, I forget. I know I'm gonna remember later on. But listen,
I know the group. New Birth.
New Birth, that's it. Yes.
I love New Birth. I listen to that in the studio. I listen to that in the studio.
Okay, if I had a theme song, it would probably be Shine by the Barcades.
Oh yes. Yeah. I love that too. I love all that music like that,
Listen, man, I could talk to you about a number of things, and I'd like this to be organic, but we have a lot of questions, and so I'm gonna throw some questions at you here.
Okay.
Actually, do you wanna have the students ask?
Well, we received some questions, and then let me start with one of those first, David, and then we could go to you next.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. This is an interesting one. The question is, you have said everything that we are based on is specific construction. Can you elaborate on that thought?
Well, maybe that sounds like a little bit of fragmentation of maybe something I might have said, but the origin of humanity is based on a construction of ideals that are imposed on us based on our social, economic, and cultural perspective. And those things are very important to look at for me as an artist for a substance when I'm making work. A lot of things that I make are solely based on just my relationship in a reflective way, looking at family, looking at history, looking at my surroundings, and thinking about everything from religion to socioeconomic structure within my own family structure, and just the way that they kind of play out in the way I see myself and the way I interact and engage with others. So to me, you cannot be outside of the product of your environment. So that particular statement was referring to that.
You know, Jacob Lawrence is someone that I think of when I think of your work.
Yeah, I love him.
And actually, so do I. I had a pleasure of meeting him. I'll tell you a story. When I was my senior year, my last semester of college, I was trying to figure out what was next. And I thought, well, I'll go to grad school. So for folks that are in the audience, this was not long ago. So 89, 90, thereabouts. I picked up the phone book. I know you know what I'm talking about, the big yellow phone book.
Yeah.
And I found Jacob Lawrence's number.
Wow.
I called Jacob Lawrence. I called the school. And they said, well, they gave me his number. I called his number. And I told him who I was, introduced myself, and told him that how much I appreciated his work, not knowing really the seriousness of what his contribution was to both, art history, American art history, Black art history, and I said, I'm graduating, and I'm interested in coming to graduate school, and I'd like to, study with you. And he said, well, I'm flattered, but I'm sorry, I just retired.
Huh?
Yeah, it was funny, man. And a bit of irony, after moving to Houston and while in graduate school, my career began to prosper and take off. Jacob Lawrence comes to town, and I have an opportunity to meet with him. He remembered me, and we were in another show, I remember, in Dallas, and he said to me we were at a Japanese restaurant. It was a group of us, and he said to me, and I was clinging to him, man, like I wanted to hear anything that he could drop, right? Uh-huh. He said to me, you're always present. An artist is always present in his work. So when I look at your work, how much of you is there versus you standing back observing? Because sometimes when you do research, you're not in the research. You're looking at it at a distance. Yeah. How much of you are really there in the making?
I feel that I'm pretty much somehow in the center of everything that I'm making, because a lot of things that I do make, even if it's coming from research, the research acts pretty much as a confirmation of ways that I feel about myself and about the culture. And looking at some of the other references that are not my work really helped me to kind of gain the foundational structure for kind of imagining what could exist through my visual interpretation, knowing that something has existed before me that has laid down some type of foundation allows me to really think about it in a way that's more liberating, to know that there were Black Americans who created products that I used as a kid who had no idea I had no idea who created them. Mm-hmm. Had I known, I would have felt a certain level of empowerment that I did not know, and now that I do know, I became really excited about the opportunity to incorporate it as a body of work, to make a statement, and also to shed light on this individual. So I always feel like it's really about me every time, but it's about me taking advantage of the information that I've discovered in a way to offer it to the next generation. So it's not as hard to find out. I think that visual language is the most prominent language. And like you say, with your Germany, you saw the signs, you kind of knew where to go. Like, I feel the same way about art. Maybe you may not know about Victor Hugo Green, or you may not know about this person, but if I make work about this person, it can only direct the viewer to know more, to learn more about these individuals in their lives and the things they have accomplished. It's almost like, my undergrad degree was in art education, and I taught in some of the public schools and elementary, and I realized even when I was teaching how a lot of the materials were really out of date. A lot of the information was not current. The teachers knew they weren't current. There was no way for them to change the textbooks because the textbooks were issued through the city or the state. So all these things, I started to realize how much this has played such a major part on the way that identity is shaped and formed, and the way that people who are not white understand themselves in this bigger scheme of things. And so from that, I really started thinking about research as a source of inspiration for making something sometimes totally ambiguous of this research. The research for me was really more about giving myself the authority to explore in this idea that I've discovered through my research about these individuals that I did not know about, and how these individuals that I'm making work about are really not that different than a lot of individuals that I'm around on a constant basis doing all of these amazing things. And I'm at parties with them, I'm at the pool with them, we're talking about all these different things, and we never really think about ourselves usually as political figures, but in all actuality, we're doing things that are very important to the shape of the world, and how things are going to be, how things are going to move forward. And a lot of times, I think that people don't really think of themselves as political figures or as activists because they aren't doing things that are identifiably mirroring things that are obvious to the way we look at media and the people that we celebrate that are put in textbooks and things like that. But activism can take many different forms. And the people who are activists can do a lot of different things beyond being situated in this kind of prescribed visual idea of what an activist or what a person who believes in justice would look like. And so I'm interested in that. And I'm interested in, I want to be in shows where an artist who making work that's more overtly political is juxtaposed with my work that is speaking from a particular type of way. Like, I think that both images can occupy the same space without being in competition, but also being more an in-depth look at both the complexity of the Black experience in a way that's not always visible.
It's kind of like the 60s. I always say that, David, I haven't forgotten you. I always say that the 60s could not have been what they were and what we interpret them as, if not for not just Martin Luther King, but Malcolm X, and also the Black Panthers.
And James Brown.
And, well, yeah, Black is beautiful. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. The concept of leisure in American culture, if you think about it, leisure wasn't associated with Black bodies much throughout the American culture. With it, well into the 20th century, the possessors of leisure was not necessarily a white male. It wasn't the Black female. No. Definitely wasn't the Black male. It was the white female.
Yes.
If you think about leisure from this bracket, early 1900s, 1900 to 2000, look at leisure, how it evolves. What is leisure associated with? Leisure and comfort, comfort, beauty, rest, all of those kinds of things. So it's interesting that at this particular point, you're doing this in the midst of this type of work, in the midst of pandemic, floating, at ease, at rest, at peace. But David, I'm gonna turn it over to you for another question.
Yeah, we have a couple of students queued up, and one of them is an alum. His name is Ronte Butler. Tay, you wanna go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, Dave, appreciate you letting me speak. Derrick, good to see you. I just had one question, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on your use of collage. Why collage? How important is collage to your practice? How important do you think it is to Black art, if not all art in general? Thank you.
Well, thanks for that question. It's really funny because when I started making collage in like 2000, well, I've been making collage off and on for a while, but one of the things that really pushed me to work on collage is kind of understanding what I wanted to get out of applying collage in my work. You know, I also started to look at the way other artists, my peers and other artists before me, use collage. One thing I was not exactly excited about with collage was collage that is that kind of represent like over embellishment or things being ornate. I was really interested in collage for the ability to create space, and that collage has this way of pushing things forward and backwards based on the way that it sits next to other images, similar to the way that people make painting, but it has another level of immediacy that painting does not have, because collage actually, you can see the distance, the movement automatically when you lay something collage next to something else. So for me, collage became a really important part of also the way that when I use some images or some objects in collage, they also have their own history and their own relationship to the viewer based on images. Like when I made the television screen collages, I was using this kind of faux wood grain, and I was kind of gluing it onto these big cardboard structures and making these huge knobs. And for me, the reason I kind of created this kind of three-dimensional object as a work is because for me, I looked at the television frame as it relates to American culture, because I thought that American culture, the whole like ornate gold frame, to me, that's what the old television is to me. It's our opulent at one time frame. It was a frame that people looked at their television as furniture. They looked at their television as, even when it broke down, they didn't get rid of it. It became a table, for another television. So, I try to think about collage in a way of trying to communicate some of the history that I'm a part of, but also the idea that collage could create this like very interesting and provocative like narrative just by laying it next to something else and creating space and movement.
It's interesting you're talking about the television. Some of my favorite of your work, and the thing that attracted me to that was, and I joked about it with you earlier, was a time when television went off, and at 12 at night, and that you're bringing that reference back in these work, which is really interesting.
I mean, that was one of the times, like, people you don't experience that now, but that's a very local station. But that was one of the things that I was always exciting about that series, because I was remaking images that were screen captures from situation comedies and in series with the all black cast, and that was kind of like the relationship to the formed color bar structure that I incorporated in the bodies as well as the backgrounds of those works. But a lot of that work was all like mostly cut paper and cut cardboard. But for me, I felt like that work had to have a very physical, tactile presence with collage. So the collage was a little bit more dimensional than some of the other collage where I've used photographic images to make collage work. So I think it varies a lot, but it's, I use it not because I necessarily love to use collage. I use it because I believe that different medias have different languages already embedded in them. And I like to take advantage of the way that people are attracted to different forms of output through photography, sculpture, and how they kind of navigate around it and in front of it. So I think about those things when I think about collage or photographic images or sculptural images.
Collage has been around a while. We don't have to talk about the origins of it, but you could find it everywhere. I mean, it's fragmentation, and all those things exist in your work. When I think about television going off, I think about a certain period in our culture where language, the social interactions, all of these things that shape who we are as individuals and how we maneuver and communicate. Television used to go off at 12, from what I remember. I'm not sure in your neck of the woods, you know.
Oh, yeah, everywhere, you know.
Yeah,
and local television went off, you know.
But the interesting thing about that is, you know, I'm thinking of early film making and montages, which is collaged images and spicing different images together to create meaning and whatnot. But you know, it's interesting. We're in a different point now where the digital media and not media, but image making, the presence of digital technology. I can look at Lovecraft, for example. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Love that show. Oh my God, I'm so sad it went off.
That too.
Sad it went off.
You're talking about the collaging right there, you know, past, present. Yeah, exactly. So that question of collage, man, it's as real and valuable today as it ever was.
I mean, we're all collages in some ways. And so for me, I think that collage, the reason why I really was drawn to it in my practice, and I go back to it from time to time, is because there's certain things that just resonate with me as a maker on the physical application of layering stuff onto other things. And then sometimes I feel it's not as necessary, but when I have the opportunity to incorporate it, I take full advantage of it. But I'm also very deliberate in what it's used for, even in the language. I don't really use it to show ornamentation. I use it to show like physicality in the subject. I use it so that the viewer to understand that I'm constructing something. I want people to know that I'm actually making something. And I think that collage can allude to that more than any other material.
So really, we think that way too, in moments and pulling things from different places. I remember, I think it was Kilner, I'm paraphrasing something I read on Douglas Kilner's work on Baudrillard, that the only thing left is to play with the pieces of the puzzle. In other words, looking back in this closet called history and pulling and being able to find some commonality between things to construct. And today you could do it at a quicker rate. And as you can see in something like Lovecraft, you know, and you could sync them together where they don't seem to be no difference, you know. So it makes me think about a Romero Bearden or Hannah Hooch, for example, with collage and playing with a larger enhanced image of an eye or a hand in close proximity to a smaller head, which changes, shifting meaning and whatnot. Excuse me, man, I'm having some sinus issues here.
It kind of goes, you know, sometimes, you know, it kind of is reminiscent to me when I think about the way that scale is manipulated to show the importance of subject or place, is to me always alluding to the way that hieroglyphics are formed and how collage can play a really parallel part of the way hieroglyphics are formed on walls, because it is a kind of a coded language using familiar imagery that that is identifiable, or the idea that is identifiable to the viewer in some ways. But the emphasis on scale, it also reflects the way that hieroglyphics are created, because the major figures are always, or the figure that the creator wants you to pay attention to mostly is a larger figure. The other figures are not as significant, but they also play a part in identifying who is the most important in the narrative. So I think collage, and Bearden especially, really utilized that in his collage making, where he really exaggerated the form in some ways, or features of the form, to show key figures in the narrative, that I think he did so successfully, because he was using all of these found objects, and he was very prolific in his making as an artist. So I think that he just became so savvy in understanding what was necessary to tell certain stories and how to reduce it and how to amplify it through layering of material and color.
You know, it makes me think of Jay Dilla, some of his beats, collaging, much of hip hop, James Brown tracks, borrowing from a period. I mean, the producers of this stuff grew up listening to it as kids, and then modifying it, fragmenting it, and collaging it, and piecing it together in different ways. Even storytelling with hip hop, you know, could make references to different things, different moments, so forth and so on. So there's a back and forth or presence with, I think, music in that sense as well. We have another question coming from, I think it's
Jamie Hart.
Amy.
Jamie, want to ask your question? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, Jamie.
Yeah. Hey, Derrick, thanks for
I saw you earlier, man.
Yeah, I saw you earlier. How are you doing? That's my question. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I think that you actually touched on my initial question, which was I was interested to hear you talk about the way you approach the formal strategies in your work, so shape, color, rhythm, and then transition into the more research-based approaches and how you see that collision kind of working, or if you don't see it as a collision at all. And I think you actually answered that you don't really see it as it's all kind of part of the same central focus. But something else that Michael Ray Charles brought up in the beginning was the sense of dissonance that he felt in some of the work. And I kind of thought about that too, that there, in some of the paintings, there feels like this frozen kind of tension that's happening formally, and then also in the subjects, you know, Michael Ray Charles has floating, but the eyes are open, you know, all of these kind of things. And then when I saw the installation of the 4 chairs in the bank, pointed towards this screen, I got another sense of this kind of like discordant tension. The chairs they're like more like dentist chairs than Lazy Boy or something. So I was interested to hear if that's anything you think about.
They're actually race car chair forms.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was something kind of like a feeling of dissonance in that installation, and I was interested to hear if you see that in the work, if you see that operating, or if I'm misreading, I guess.
No, I definitely see my work is definitely a very focused, labor-intensive, like mentally labor-intensive desire and plan to redirect conversation. And it's trying to do that while I'm occupying a space of noise. So a lot of the things that I'm creating are based on constant disruptions of things that exist around me. So those things are not separated from who I am or how I exist in the world. So the idea of presenting this idea of harmony could never fully exist in the way that I imagine it to exist because of the reality of dealing with things that I cannot control. But as an artist, you can still show that. You can still show that as much as you can, your desire to try to create the space, even though it may not always come together in a way that is sentimental. Because I don't think that my work, even though I'm talking about these things that I think about leisure and family, and I don't really think my work represents those things in a very sentimental way. It's almost like I'm purposely creating these imagery that even, this is for the future when I think about what I'm making. Like I feel like it's too current in the way that people look at the idea of leisure. Like for me to even talk about it, to me is discounts the work in some ways. Like I feel like the work has to live beyond me. I have to not be here on earth for people to look at the work and say, oh, this is what this guy was making in 2000 whatever, and this is what he was focused on. You know, I feel like me being present and being alive will always somehow contradict this idea or these ideals that I'm trying to represent in my work, because I have to constantly talk about the importance of these things and not just represent them as what they are, you know? So looking at the work and seeing this, the figure, because sometimes, you know, the figures are floating, but they're not entertaining. They're floating the way that you may be on your float in your house when no one's around. And that is not as entertaining as being on a float or being in leisure where you're performing for the camera. A lot of the images I've photographed or used as reference to painting are images of people who were not looking at the camera, or they may have been deep in thought. That is not a look that would refer to joy, but it might be a little bit more complicated than that, because to me, being in leisure is usually the time that I'm thinking the most about critical things. Usually when I'm relaxing on a chair in my yard or whatever, is I feel like those are the times where I'm more deep in thought than when I'm actually talking like I'm talking now. I feel like I'm able to really get a bigger grasp on society and life when I'm disconnected. And sometimes people walk into the room and say, "Are you okay?" Because I'm like thinking, but I'm sitting in a chair, maybe having a beer, but I'm thinking about like the world. And I may appear that I'm chilling out, and I am, but I'm still not disconnected from reality. So I think that becomes a part of like dissonance in a way that, yes, it's always going to have this level of not necessarily being in harmony, because you're totally disrupted by what's happening around you. It's almost like you're having a picnic in the middle of a war. You know, you are trying to, get your hair cut is a shootout outside, but you still want to get your hair cut and you still want to go out. You know, it's like all these things are contradictions of what is acceptable, but what is normal. But these are things that we still have to reach for and at least understand that we deserve. And that's why, the figures always, to me, I look at the work when I make them, I'm like, oh, even when she's in the float, she still like she's like in some kind of like weird expressive posture. But to me, I'm like, that's real. It's less propaganda than having a person looking like a postcard in some ways. And so that joyous color palette and the juxtaposed compositional geometric form, to me, is just more so just a camouflage of a lot of different things that are happening to these figures in this space.
Are you okay to take one more?
Yeah.
Okay. Brian Ellison.
Yeah, so once again, thank everybody, and thank you, Derrick. My question is around, you mentioned leisure and Blackness, and you kind of just spoke to this a little bit, and then you gave this example of someone coming home and you having to hop up and act like you're doing something.
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me, because when my grandmother came home, I better stand up and act like I'm taking out the trash, sweeping the floor, thawing out the chicken, doing something. And so, but when I think about leisure and when I think about Blackness, I think about like the perspective of like when someone looks at someone that is Black and enjoying their leisure time, if you will, and how it's equated to being lazy. And I think about like the pandemic, for a lot of artists, it was kind of hard to create, but you felt, social media and all these other things are saying, hey, now's the time you got to grind it out. No, this is the time to push out the work. And you were able to make work during the time that speaks to the thing that we should have been doing the most, which was like really just being still. And I just wanted to know, like, how did you think, if you could even dive in a little bit deeper, how did you think about leisure and Blackness and even equating it to laziness for some?
I definitely have that same history, and I think it's a history that is an imposed history on the working class and the oppressed black figure. The idea that you have to constantly be in this position of work or to show a level of accountability for your existence. That is something that's kind of imposed on us, and it's been something that's handed down through our experience with slavery and being a part of the American story. But yeah, I mean, for me, I came from that history, and and other experiences with other family members, and was able to kind of look at other examples of what I felt was the most empowering for me as a young person. And leisure for me is not. Some people think of leisure as being like an economic thing, because you hear leisure, you think that it's something that it's given to people or allow people who have a certain social status. And it sounds fancy, but leisure is not really anything other than disconnecting and having moments of reflection. And so for me, the pandemic actually allowed me to be the most productive that I've been in a long time, because I was able to focus on making art and just being disconnected. But in the beginning of the pandemic, it was definitely a challenge being motivated or self-motivated, because everything just stopped. But then in my studio, I realized that, I went back to the origin of my practice, and I started doing drawings. And then I just started doing one drawing, and I started doing another drawing. And, and next thing I know, I ended up making 20 something works from March to June. And I just felt really excited because I was able to just focus. But it took some recalibrating to really get to that place where I could have this meditative moment. But also I'm in New York, where a lot is really hectic on a normal basis. I had 3 shows that opened this year, right from January to February, 3 or 4 shows that opened. Solo exhibitions that I was working on the year before that all happened just before the pandemic. So for me, I was like kind of happy, not for the pandemic, but I was happy to be disconnected because everyone just paused, and I didn't get those calls I would get, the emails I had to check. And so everyone kind of allowed people to kind of just step away and just deal with their life, deal with their family, deal with things that we've been avoiding, before this. So I was able to actually accomplish some things. But yes, it did affect me mentally, because I teach college. I'm a professor at Brooklyn College. And I'm really excited about doing, working there and working with the students there. So I became more of a counselor of some sort, or a guide or guidance person during the pandemic, because I was dealing with younger artists who were dealing with isolation and being disconnected and not having access to their studio. So I took on a wholly different role during the pandemic that was both, stressful on that side, being this professor who does studio visits with the grad and undergrad. Now I'm doing Zoom, all day, all week, so that was the thing that I felt was a challenge for me, but I had to deal with it. I mean, everything was canceled. My thing I would say to the students all the time, because everyone was upset they didn't have a thesis show, and I would say to them, the world is canceled. Like, it's not just about your show. Like, the whole world is canceled. So, like, you're not having a show. I'm sorry, but no one's having a show. So that, to me, I learned a lot this year, just based on all of those issues, those challenges. But you got to push through it.
Well, Derrick, I think that would be our last question, unless you're open for one more. I'm not gonna put that pressure on you. We'll close out.
Yeah. Thank you.
I want to say again, man, thank you for allowing us to celebrate your work and your ideas, and you being able to introduce those to our community here. And I can assure you that we will try to have you back on the backside of this pandemic, where you can come in the physical form and interact with our community here.
Well, thank you, Michael Ray and David, for inviting me. I had such a great conversation with you both. And I enjoyed the visits with the students today. And I look forward to seeing you guys in person at some point. Thank you. And thank you everyone who's out there listening who participated in questions. I greatly appreciate you all, and I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.